This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. This is Chapter 24, Rhuidean, and our symbol is the dice, for Matt, of course.
It's a Matt chapter. And his luck has a lot to do with what's going on in this chapter.
He's very lucky.
The way he, yells out his wishes without considering them at all, very lucky.
He doesn't even know that he's wishing.
Exactly.
He's just yelling at them. Like last time. The smooth pebble in Matt's mouth was not making moisture anymore, and had not been for some time. Spitting it out, he squatted beside Rand and stared at the billowing gray wall maybe 30 paces in front of them. Fog. He hoped at least it was cooler in there than out here, and some water would be appreciated. His lips were cracking. He pulled the scarf from around his head and wiped his face, but there was not much sweat to dampen the cloth. Not much sweat remained in him to come out. A place to sit down. His feet felt like cooked sausages inside his boots. He felt pretty well cooked all over, for that matter. The fog stretched to left and right, better than a mile, and bulked over his head like a towering cliff. A cliff of thick mist in the middle of a barren, blistered valley. There had to be water in there. Why doesn't it burn off? He did not like that part of it. Fooling with the power had brought him here, and now it seemed he had to fool with it again. Light, I want to be free of the power in Aes Sedai. Burn me, I do. Anything not to think of stepping into that fog, for just a minute more. That was Egwene's Aiel friend I saw running, he croaked. Running! In this heat! Just thinking of it made his feet hurt worse. Avienda, whatever her name is. If you say so, Rand said, studying the fog. He sounded as if he had a mouthful of dust. His face was sunburned, and he wavered unsteadily in his crouch. But what would she be doing down here? And naked? Matt let it go. Rand had not seen her. He had hardly taken his eyes off the roiling mist since starting down the mountain, and he did not believe Matt had seen her either, running like a madwoman and keeping wide of the two of them, heading for this strange fog, it had seemed to him. Rand appeared no more eager to step into that than he was. He wondered whether he looked as bad as Rand did. Touching his cheek, he winced. He expected he did.
Only Matt would be lucky enough to see Rand's wife naked before he does. And there was a little foreshadowing on the scarf. He's got that scarf around his head that we see him use to cover up his neck.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like the scarf becomes a pretty mainstay of Matt's
clothing.
Character and clothing. That whatever he is, he's always got that scarf, whether it's a pink scarf or a black scarf. The scarf and lace are part of his signature look. And the hat.
After the chapter after this one, he doesn't want anyone asking questions why he has a terrible scar around his neck from being hung.
No one's questioning why he has a terrible scar, because that's very much a hanging scar. Everyone's questioning, why'd you get hung?
Yeah?
What else gives you a scar like that?
I don't know. Anything. I understand not wanting to explain. Rand asks Matt if he's sure he wants to do this, because he really doesn't need to come. I think because neither of them has talked about why they're going. Matt hasn't explained that it was in... Well, he will in a moment, but he hasn't explained that the snake people told him that he has to go to Rhuidean.
It's that or die. If he sidesteps his fate, he will be killed.
Rhuidean or death. Matt says, no, I don't want to.
No, I don't want to. I have to. I did notice earlier he's thinking, Light, I want to be free of Aes Sedai and the One Power before he goes through that boiling mist. Just that thought of wanting to be free of Aes Sedai is just constantly on his mind.
I really like that. Matt says, it's not enough to be the Bloody Dragon Reborn. You want to be an Aiel clan chief, too? What are you doing here? And he says, maybe those snake people just tell everyone they have to go to Rhuidean. How do we know they're not just bullshitting us? And Rand's like, no, they didn't say anything about Rhuidean to me. Matt's like, oh, crap.
I gave that one away. And then later when he claims, oh, they didn't tell me anything, and Rand gives him a look except you told me they mentioned Rhuidean. So, yeah, that's definitely, I should not have said that moment. I should not have said that.
Well, I thought Matt, it's just upsetting to Matt because he's realizing that he did hear a unique thing. They're giving him unique advice for him. He has to go to Rhuidean. It's not just a fake story, which is, I think,
that too. That, and I just think he didn't want to, give it away.
Yeah? Why?
I mean, he just constantly lies about what happened in the doorway. He doesn't want to admit anything happened in the doorway. He doesn't want to admit that he is talking in the old tongue, something weird is happening to him, that he has a fate.
Yeah, I guess all the boys are kind of Well, yeah. Matt's the one that doesn't, or refute, or in denial. He's the only one still in denial.
He denies that he has a fate, yeah. And yet, with his every action, he runs towards it in full view. Just like, I don't want to go there, as he runs towards it. Okay.
But he knows he has to.
Stop running that way.
I liked here that we see Matt's been carrying that same Tarvalin gold mark, the one he flipped to see if he needed to go into the first stone doorway.
Totally.
And he flipped the same one when he and Rand tried to combine Ta'verenness at the portal stone. Matt flips the coin and Rand yells out what it's going to be.
With our Ta'veren combined, we are Captain Randland. One thing, so as they pass through this fog into Rhuidean, I noticed there's this shadowless light that reminds me a lot of the light in Ter'angreal. When they talk about like light coming from nowhere in particular, it's just this like, it's just a glow everywhere. And that combined with the fact that Rhuidean is not a place that you can access in Ter'angreal, I have to wonder if somehow in the creation of Rhuidean, they are basically creating a city that is somehow partially in the dream or somehow outside of the real world. What is it that keeps this fog in place? What is it that protects it from the dream world? Whatever it is, it's destroyed by Rand when he fights Asmodean.
Yeah. I think a lot of items or power are destroyed. We never really get to see the what's what.
Right. But I do wonder if there's something going on that sort of has placed Rhuidean outside of time or outside of normal patternness.
Sure.
Certainly it's something that keeps it outside of Ter'angreal.
Yeah, you can't go there in the dream. Yeah, Bambi, it is like a dream spike.
Kind of.
And who knows? That could be part of what's happening. Here, I had that thought.
The thing with the dream spike is you can actually cross that barrier in the world of dreams. You just can't like teleport across it.
Sure.
Whereas in Rhuidean, you simply cannot go in. If anything, it's more like steading, which are from another world.
And we do know that a ton of items of power are destroyed when Rand and Asmodean have their fight in a couple of chapters here. So it could be any one of those, or many of them.
Or even none of them. It could be something just with the city itself. I mean, what happens if you balefire through weaves? Does that destroy them? I would think so. If
you balefire a weave?
Yeah.
Do we ever see anything like that happen? We see balefire get balefired.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Or are you trying to say that maybe it's just a weave that's placed around Rhuidean?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And that by shooting balefire off, they puncture it and destroy it in a bunch of ways until it can no longer hold together. You know, it's just a tied-off weave that eventually unravels once it's been punctured.
It's true. You throw enough balefire around wildly, and who knows what's going to happen.
Right. Rather than like a specific Ter'angreal that's like sitting somewhere that gets hit by balefire.
Rand? The sound might as well not have come from his mouth. The murk seemed to swallow it before it reached his own ears. This is Matt walking through the thick fog. There's a moment where no one can see anything. He was not even sure of his direction anymore. He could always remember his way. Anything might be ahead of him, or under his feet. He could not see his feet. The fog shrouded him completely below the waist. He picked up his pace regardless, and suddenly stepped out beside Rand into a peculiar shadowless light. The fog made an enormous hollow dome hiding the sky, its bubbling inner surface glowing in a pale, sharp blue. Rhuidean was not nearly so big as Tyr or Caemlyn, but the empty streets were broad as any he had ever seen, with wide strips of bare dirt down their centers, as if trees had grown there once, and great fountains with statues. Huge buildings flanked the streets, odd, flat-sided palaces of marble and crystal and cut glass, ascending hundreds of feet in steps or sheer walls. There was not a small building to be seen, nothing that might have been a simple tavern or an inn or a stable, only immense palaces, with gleaming columns 50 feet thick climbing 100 paces in red or white or blue, and grand towers, fluted and spiraled, some piercing the glowing clouds above. For all its grandeur, the city had never been finished. Many of those tremendous structures ended in the saw teeth of abandoned construction. Colored glass made images in some huge windows, serenely majestic men and women 30 feet tall or more, sunrises and starry night skies. Others gaped emptily, unfinished and long deserted. No water splashed in any fountain. Silence covered the city as completely as a dome of fog. The air was cooler than outside, but just as arid. Dust grated underfoot on pale, smooth paving stones. Matt trotted to the nearest fountain anyway, just on the off chance, and leaned on the waist-high white rim. 3 unclothed women, twice as tall as he and supporting an odd, wide-mouthed fish over their heads, peered down into a wide, dusty basin, no drier than his mouth. "Of course," Rand said behind him. "I should have thought of this before." Matt looked over his shoulder. "Thought of what?" Rand was staring at the fountain, shaking with silent laughter. "Get a hold of yourself, Rand. You didn't go crazy in the last minute. You should have thought of what?" A hollow gurgling whipped Matt's eyes back to the fountain. Abruptly, water gushed out of the fish's mouth, a stream as thick as his leg. He scrambled into the basin and ran to stand under the downpour, head back and mouth open. Cold, sweet water, cold enough to make him shiver, sweeter than wine. It soaked his hair, his coat, his breeches. He drank until he thought he would drown, finally staggering over to lean panting against a woman's stone leg. Rand was still standing there, staring at the fountain, face red and lips cracked, laughing softly. "No water, Matt. They said we couldn't bring water, but they did not say anything about what was already here." "Rand, aren't you going to drink?" Rand gave a start, then stepped into the now ankle-deep basin and splashed across to stand where Matt had been, drinking in the same way, eyes closed and face tilted up to let the water pour over him. Matt watched worriedly. Not mad, exactly. Not yet. But how long would Rand have stood there laughing while thirst turned his throat to stone if he had not spoken?
Yeah, I think there's a sign of insanity going on there.
It's not funny.
I was talking... No, it's really not. You are literally dehydrated and having serious physical issues, and you have water? Like, I would not hesitate for a second. I'd act the way Matt does. But Rand, he may be a little detached from reality.
Yeah, well, it's probably well established if you've been listening to the podcast, but I think that Rand started going crazy. It's been books now. The slow creep of madness is already happening.
And I think Callandor accelerated it. I think it was a step up when he started using Callandor.
They're just channeling that much tainted power.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And of course, what he did is he brought the water up from below, and that ends up being important because after the last battle, Rhuidean becomes essentially the Aiel city.
The only Aiel city.
And they're able to, the only Aiel city, and it's able to support the population by having an aquifer, basically deep underground.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, why did the Gen Aiel build Rhuidean? I feel like now that we're walking into it, now that we're entering it, we'll see a little bit of that in the vision tomorrow, but why is it there? What was the purpose of Rhuidean?
I would think for the same reason anyone builds any city. It's a place for people to congregate, to do trade, to live. I
don't think so, because I think that they knew this place would never be finished and not be occupied. Because, the Aiel, it wasn't for the Aiel.
No? I mean, if it's a city that's not meant to be a city, why fill it with palaces? Or any structures at all, right? It could just be a...
Yeah, that was my question. Like, I mean, there's a couple of possibilities. One, it's for after the last battle, and it's going to be needed then. But I think it's also, why is it needed now? I think it's a place for Rand to go through the Ter'angreal, a place to keep them. But I think it's also a place for Rand to fight Asmodean, and a place for him to find the access keys. Everyone's saying they were trying to recreate something from the Age of Legends, that this city was going to be sort of a copy of the Age of Legends city.
Yeah, they tried to mimic, this city building style that they knew.
Right.
And it was built with the aid of Aes Sedai at the time, who survived the breaking. And then I think all that we know is that the gen died out for one reason or another before it was ever finished.
But they built it knowing they would never finish it. Like, they started it knowing they were dying out, and they would never... Well, again, it's more something more to talk about tomorrow when we actually see the building of Rhuidean. But
yeah, I don't remember. Is that in there?
Mm-hmm.
That they knew they would never finish it?
It's one of the things where they think that they might not have a chance to. But the point I wanted to make, and it took me a while to get here, is I think that the prophecy that is the creation of the Eye of the World, the creation of the stone, and putting Callandor there, the hiding of the horn, the hiding of the dragon banner, and the creation of Rhuidean all come from a single prophecy. And there's definitely a conversation about that in the vision tomorrow. And I think that Rhuidean basically was created out of the result of a prophecy, not because anyone really knew what it was going to be needed for. They just knew that it would be needed.
It is a mysterious place, maybe semi-intentionally. So are the Gen, in general. We don't know too much about them.
We really don't.
I wish there was more. I liked your theory. This is maybe a good time to bring it up again about Nakomi being the last of the Genaiel, perhaps somehow preserved by her really strong abilities as a dreamer and or powerful channeler and various other things.
And I think it's possible she just knew the right place and time to show up, and that was like passed down. And so she, as a dreamer, was showing up to the last battle as the final part of this foretelling.
Yeah, I've mulled over the Nakomi question a bunch of times. I was never really able to come to any conclusions. I always was just like, maybe it's just a thing like the Heroes of the Horn, except she's not a hero of the Horn, but something along similar lines, you know? Live in the world of dreams. How do you live that long?
The horn was definitely blown after we encountered Nakomi for the first time. However, Avienda probably is asleep and probably is in the world of dreams. So it's entirely, now that I think about
when Avienda sees Nakomi.
When Avienda sees Nakomi, she could be a hero of the horn in Ter'angreal. And then the horn is blown, and then she shows up to help Rand transition bodies there at the end. So a Genaiel as the hero of the horn could definitely be one of my theories. But I just, again, looking at her point of view and the way she talks and the way she doesn't have weapons and the way they emphasize that makes me think that she really is one of the Genaiel. Whether it's a hero of the horn, whether it's the last living, whether it's, a preserved dreamwalker, somehow she is a Gen.
Yeah, it seems to work, and it's honestly the best theory that I've ever heard, as far as in reference to Nakomi.
And there's so many mysteries in the Wheel of Time that are tied to that one vision of the Age of Legends Aes Sedai, where they've got the banner, the Callandor, and they're in Rhuidean. And so and they're talking about not being able to see far enough into the future. So clearly there's some prophecy and so many things that happen with Rand that lead to Rand transitioning bodies and winning the last battle and surviving the last battle and cleansing the source are entirely tied to clues he gets between Callandor, the stone, Rhuidean, the Eye of the World, and the horn. Like, there's just so much is tied to that one vision, which is why I think it's vital to talk about.
Oh yeah, he needs all those things to get to success.
And like when I really look at the mysteries in the Wheel of Time, what are the big ones? Nakomi, the changing bodies, and of course the pipe lighting. And I'm not so sure about the pipe lighting, but Nakomi and the changing bodies, and of course what was the Eye of the World? Why was the Eye of the World? What's Rhuidean for? Why is Rhuidean?
Yeah.
Well, we pretty much have all the answers we need about Callandor and how it was used in the last battle. But the other ones remain mysteries.
Yeah, I say use the phrase intentionally vague too much recently, but I feel that way again maybe here, where, these things are meant to be as mysterious to the characters in the series as they are to us. The remnants of a dead civilization, that's a real world thing. We don't know everything about what happened. Those people are dead. They've been dead for thousands of years. So people only remember, a handful of things or whatever they wrote down and survived all this time, which is, virtually nothing.
Those dead Civerones.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Broken Earth. So I've pontificated for a while. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'll read this little bit of prod us forward. The heart has to be that way, Matt. Rand was climbing out of the basin, dripping wet. The heart? The wise one said I had to go to the heart. They must mean the center of the city. Rand looked back at the fountain, and suddenly the flow dwindled to a trickle, then ceased. There's an ocean of good water down there. deep. So deep I nearly didn't find it. If I could bring it up... No need to waste it, though. We can get another good drink when it's time to leave. And then Matt suddenly realized that Rand had channeled, and that's why the fountain randomly started ringing.
It was obvious to the rest of us.
What did you think?
Like it just sprung up because you walked in? You're not quite that Taviran. Thank you very much. And I noticed that, like, he hopes he can get water on the way out, but if Rand doesn't come out, Matt's kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Or if Matt waited a week for Rand to come out, that would have been a problem, too.
Of course, in a minute here, Rand enters the columns, and Matt's, like, yelling after him, and he's looking around. He's like, an hour. I'll wait an hour. That's it.
That's it. But we know he would have waited a lot longer than that.
Probably. Matt's a good person.
Despite what he says.
It's all about actions. Books tells us that the two walk down the street for roughly a mile, and then it suddenly ends in this great plaza that's at least a mile across as well, and it's just filled with all these strange objects.
Which we all know are mostly Ter'angreal, some Sa'angreal.
And in the very center, of course, there's one huge tree.
Hey, Avendesora! We've been hearing about this for a long time. The Tree of Life.
100 feet tall, it says, with big limbs, which is only relevant because I noticed while I was reading this, something I hadn't noticed before, that the glass columns, it says, are about as tall as the tree. So it means that they're about 100 feet tall, these glass columns, which is pretty crazy. I had the idea in my head all these years. I don't know where I got it. I guess I just made it up, that there was only like a little taller than a person.
I was thinking, like 10 feet.
It says here at some point that's... at least some of the columns are almost as tall as the tree.
Right. No, it's pretty obvious they're meant to be just massive circles of these thin red crystal towers almost.
I think they're just clear glass.
No, there's a couple of other Ter'angreal that get described, and I didn't have any theories as to what they were going to be, and I was wondering if anyone else had a theory. So there's a flat silvery ring 10 feet across and as thin as a blade.
It looks like one of the... I don't want to say dream Ter'angreal because that's just a theory, but it kind of looks like the accepted rings and the wise ones rings, but there's only one. I mean, but based only on that, it's a silver ring.
10 feet across. I almost kind of looks like a trampoline with nothing in it. So, but no idea. There's no evidence, for what's going on there. A tapered crystal plinth, a paste tall that might have held one of the smaller statues. I don't even know what a crystal plinth is.
I think it's just like a mini column that you put like a potted plant on. But
it's like a pedestal, basically.
Yeah, I have trouble believing that anything here is a mundane object.
Sure.
You know?
And then a shiny black metal spire, narrow as a spear, and no longer, yet standing as if on end rooted. And that just looks like a tall... black spear.
Creepy.
Yeah. I don't think that's the Ashendarai. Some people have suggested that, but it doesn't have a blade on it. It's not anything in particular.
It says a shiny black spire, narrow as a spear, no longer standing on its end as if rooted. I mean, if it was just a spear, I don't think it would stand up by itself.
Well, and what's interesting is he uses two different words to describe it. In the first paragraph, he says, a shiny black metal spire, narrow as a spear. And then the next paragraph, he says it was the black metal spear. So is it a spear or is it as narrow as a spear?
It was the black metal spear so unnaturally erect that suddenly told him what they must be. Ter'angreal.
I think that's a typo. I think it should be black metal spire.
Some sort of things to do with the power anyway. Some of them had to be. That twisted...
Long story short, we don't know, basically.
Twisted stone doorway in the great stone's holding had resisted falling over too. He was ready to turn around and go back right then, but Rand continued on, barely looking at what lined his way. Once Rand paused, staring down at two figurines that had hardly seemed to deserve a place amongst the other things. Two statuettes maybe a foot tall, a man and a woman, each holding a crystal sphere aloft in one hand.
The Choden Call.
And Rand gets that suction again, more for lack of a better term, where he can't help but stare at them and reach out. And then he snaps back and continues walking.
I mean, I think he knows immediately what they are, and he goes to like pick one up and thinks better. Like, I don't want to give it away to anybody who might be watching.
Half bent as if to touch them, but straightened so quickly it could almost have been Matt's imagination.
But yeah, I mean, those become huge, and that's why the battle with Asmodean takes place in Rhuidean. Is Asmodean basically runs to Rhuidean in order to get the Chosen Call in order to fight Rand, and then they have that half and half, where each one of them's using half the power of the Chosen Call.
Yeah, Rand identifies that we're looking at Avendesora in the center of this big. I almost called it a square, but I think it's a circle. I guess. Synonyms, whatever, in the center of this big circle.
Well, it's interesting. Any open space can be called the town square, even if it's not square-shaped.
Town square could be a circle.
Exactly. It totally could be.
Oh, and then they sit down underneath the tree, and they're leaning against it, and they just kind of chat for a little while.
And we see some of the effect of the Chora tree, that peacefulness and contentment. And they talk a little about Gotum sitting beneath Avendesora for 40 years to gain wisdom, which has to be a reference to Buddha, right?
Oh, yeah. Sitting underneath there's a famous tree.
Tree of wisdom, right? Yeah.
It's like still there, isn't it? I mean, there's an ancient tree that people say is the tree. The Bodhi tree.
So I like that. Yeah, thank you, Devin. Siddhartha Gautama. To me, that feels like that last name, Gautama and Gautiam, are very similar construction.
Is that an anagram? That might be an anagram. Same letters, different word?
There's no H.
Well, close. One can hope. I love those little bits in here.
Totally. These are where our myths come from. We hear the stories of Rand and Mat, and we create the legend of Siddhartha, and
yeah,
as we know, Mat hangs from the Tree of Wisdom. But this is very that I love it when he has, because in that opening statement, the myths fade to legend, legend is long forgotten. That our legends are based on the Wheel of Time. And their legends are based on what we do, on the wise advisor.
There is no beginning or ending. Next thing I have is Rand approaching the columns. So I'll read this about half a page here. Starting from, they're both still sitting under the tree. I think I have to go on alone from here, Rand said slowly. What do you mean? Mat demanded. I've come this far, haven't I? I'm not going to turn tail now. Wouldn't I just like to, though? It isn't that, Mat. If you go in there, you come out a clan chief, or you die, or come out mad. I don't believe there's any other choice, unless maybe the wise ones go in there. Mat hesitated. To die and live again, he thinks, remembering the Eelfin. What the Eelfin told him, rather. That was what they had said. He had no intention of trying to be an Aiel clan chief, though. The Aiel would probably stick spears through him. We'll leave it to luck, he said, pulling the Tarvalin gold mark from his pocket. Getting to be my lucky coin. Flame. I go in with you, heads. I stay out. He flipped the gold coin quickly, before Rand could object. Somehow he missed grabbing it. The mark careened off his fingertips, clinked to the pavement, bounced twice, and landed on edge. He glared at Rand accusingly. Do you do this sort of thing on purpose? Can't you control it? No. The coin fell over, showing an ageless woman's face surrounded by stars. It looks like you stay out here, Mat. Did you just... He wished Rand would not channel around him. Oh, burn me. If you want me to stay out here, I'll stay. Snatching the coin up, he stuffed it back into his pocket. Listen, you go in, do whatever it is you have to, and get back out. I want to leave this place, and I'm not going to stand here forever twiddling my thumbs waiting for you. And you needn't think I'll come in after you either, so you'd better be careful. I wouldn't think that of you, Mat, Rand said. Mat stared at him suspiciously. What was he grinning at?
That's great. I wouldn't think that of you, Mat.
I really wanted to get your take on this part when the Mat flips the coin. He's like, Flame, I go in with you. Heads, I stay out. And it lands on its side, and him and Mat are just staring at it. Rand and Mat are just staring at it, and then it falls over. Was it Rand?
Yeah. Yes.
He's like, no, Mat, you shouldn't do it. Don't go in there.
The coin landed on edge because you have Ta'veren, and Fate wasn't saying anything one way or the other. And then when the coin was sitting there on its edge, Rand goes, bit of air. And then the whole thing, it falls over the way he wants it to.
That's what I suspected when I read that. Rand's like, it's not necessary for you to take this risk. Just wait.
No, it doesn't make any sense. God, can you imagine Mat as a clan chief?
And, I mean,
Could he have even, like, he wouldn't have seen the visions? What would he have seen? Like, that's a real question. Like, would he have...
I assume if you don't have any Aiel blood, if you go into the columns, it either kills you or does nothing. But...
I'm on the do nothing idea, but... Yeah,
and
it could be wrong.
I also assume it's attuned to Aiel blood somehow to respond to them. But we don't know that.
No, we really don't. We're just guessing.
So who knows what could have happened? Maybe Matt goes in and he sees, 100 generations of the people of Manetheren or something.
I don't think so, because, I mean, it was definitely designed to show the Aiel a very specific thing.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, and it does it through their blood, and I don't think it would work.
Me neither.
For someone who doesn't have Aiel blood. But, it's one of those things where it's just like...
We don't have enough information to say definitely nothing would happen, but...
We've never seen anyone who's not Aiel go through that.
We see one person die in the columns while Rand's in there. He walks in and Muradin is in there, who's tearing out his own eyes with his own hands, which is presumably what kills him.
That's actually a good question. Like, what, do they just go through and don't come out or does he, like, kill himself?
Right? Is there just a pile of bones
of
on the bottom?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I would think they'd be tripping over him. Because, I forget where I'm getting this from, but it's something like 1 out of 3 men who go through the columns actually returns. The rest just never come back.
Because, and some of them go insane, right? Because they see the vision and it's just like... They cannot handle the truth.
So that would be a lot of dead bodies over the years accumulating on this floor here. I imagine it would be difficult to walk around if they were just still there.
Yeah, I imagine if you have some sort of, like, reaction, you just don't come out of the last... If you react too much, there's, like... You just never emerge from the last vision. Because I do believe that the second Rand walks into the columns... He seemed to vanish almost immediately. A trick of the eye, Matt told himself. I don't think it's a trick of the eye. I think Rand's literally
somewhere else,
disappearing into the vision.
Yeah.
He's literally physically experiencing his vision.
I would like to think that this works something like the other Ter'angreal that give people visions. They're not there. They're not in the world, so to speak, for a while. So, like... young women who enter the ring Ter'angreals in the tower, some go in and some just never come out.
They just never come out.
There's no body to collect.
And while they're taking the test, there's no body. It's not like they're unconscious, like experiencing this in their mind. Unlike perhaps with the punishment throne, what was that called?
It's like the throne of regret or...
Yeah, remorse.
Yes. The chair of remorse?
It's not a binding chair. Chair of remorse, yes. But in that case, it's not like they go anywhere to experience those things. It's all in their head.
Right. That's different.
They're not going through a Ter'angreal-style Ter'angreal. So while Matt's wandering around wondering what to do next, he sees the polished red stone Ter'angreal. The same one, almost? The only thing I'd say is the 3 lines of triangles points down. I feel like that is the difference between the 2 of them. I feel like that indicates the foxes, and then the symbol for the snakes was actually the wavy line across it. So that's the only difference between the 2, but it's how you know whether you're going to go see the snakes or whether you're going to see the foxes.
Yeah, and it seems like the doorways are almost identical, other than that mark.
I think they are identical, other than that mark.
Suddenly, he stopped dead, staring at one of those strange objects, a large door frame of polished redstone, twisted in some way he could not quite catch, so his eyes seemed to slip, trying to follow it around. Slowly, he made his way to it, between glittering faceted spires as tall as his head, and low golden frames filled with what appeared to be sheets of glass, barely noticing them, never taking his eyes off the doorway. It was the same polished redstone, the same size, the same eye-wrenching corners. Along each upright ran 3 lines of triangles, points down. Had the one in Tyr had those? Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. The one in Tyr had squiggly lines along the sides. He could not remember. He had been trying to remember all the details last time. It was the same. It had to be. Maybe he could not step through the other again. But this one? Another chance to get those snake people, make them answer a few more questions.
Nope.
Squinting against the glitters, he peered back toward the columns. An hour, he had given Rand. In an hour, He could be through this thing and back with time to spare. Maybe it would not even work for him, since he had used its twin. They are the same. Then again, maybe it would. It just meant rubbing up against the power one more time. Light, he muttered. Ter'angreal, portal stones, Rhuidean. What difference can one more time make? He stepped through a wall of blinding white light, through a roar so vast it annihilated sound. Blinking, he looked around and bit back the vilest oath he knew. Wherever this was, it was not where he had gone before. The twisted stone doorway stood in the middle of a huge chamber that appeared to be star-shaped, as near as he could make out, through a forest of thick columns, each deeply fluted with 8 ridges, the sharp edges yellow and glowing softly for light. Glossy black, except for the glowing bits, they rose from a dull white floor into murky gloom far overhead, where even the yellow stripes faded away. The columns and floor almost looked to be glass, but when he bent to rub a hand across the floor, it felt like stone, dusty stone. He wiped his hand on his coat. The air had a musty smell, and his own footprints were the only marks in the dust. No one had been here in a very long time.
The fact that the chamber is star-shaped
Mm-hmm.
makes, again, I want to come back to my point that the snakes occupy the curved areas of the world, and the foxes occupy the radial parts of the spider web. And that's why you see all these 8 ridges, and it's this star-shaped chamber in the center, is that basically what you're seeing is all the various lines going out. And the physics don't work. It's not like, the curves and the lines aren't physically in our world, so the geometry is different, but it's important to see whether they're curved or straight.
Yeah, I really like that theory. It makes sense when you're looking at the inside of these things, or places, rather.
And especially if you look at the board that they play snakes and foxes on, it sort of represents the straight lines and the circles. Physics obviously works different, but it has rules. The tower is essentially the center of the spiderweb, Fire Phoenix. The 3 towers occupy like the 3 center spires.
You're blowing people's minds, it looks like.
So that's the center. The whole point of the game with snakes and foxes is to get to the center and then get back out again. And so you get to the center, which is the spires, and then you rescue Moraine, and then you get back out again.
Disappointed, he turned back to the Ter'angreal. A very long time. Matt spun back, snatching at his coat sleeve for a knife that was lying back on the mountainside. The man standing among the columns looked nothing at all like the snaky folk. It made Matt regret giving up those last blades to the wise ones. The fellow was tall, taller than an Aiel, and sinewy, but with shoulders too wide for his narrow waist, and skin as white as the finest paper. Pale leather straps studded with silver crisscrossed his arms and bare chest, and a black kilt hung to his knees. His eyes were too big and almost colorless, set deep in a narrow-jawed face. His short-cut, palely reddish hair stood up like a brush, and his ears, lying flat against his head, had a hint of a point at the top. He leaned toward Matt, inhaling, opening his mouth to pull in more air, flashing sharp teeth. The impression he gave was of a fox about to leap on a cornered chicken. A very long time, he said, straightening. His voice was rough, almost a growl. Do you abide by the treaties and agreements? Do you carry iron, or instruments of music, or devices for making light? I have none of those things, Matt replied slowly. This was not the same place, but this fellow asked the same questions, and he behaved the same, with all that smell rummaging through my bloody experience, is he? Well, let him. Maybe he'll jog some loose so I can remember them too. He wondered if he was speaking the old tongue again. It was uncomfortable, not knowing, not being able to tell. If you can take me to where I can get a few questions answered, lead the way. If not, I will be going, with apologies for bothering you. No! Those big colorless eyes blinked in agitation. You must not go. Come. I will take you to where you may find what you need. Come. He backed away, gesturing with both hands. Come. Glancing at the Ter'angreal, Matt followed. He wished the man had not grinned at him just then.
So, a couple of questions came up. It's been a long time for the foxes. It's been 2,500 years since, maybe even longer, it may have been the breaking before someone went through this one, versus the snakes, which had been used for, up until about 300 years ago.
Right.
So, And the question is, have the foxes shared? Do they get to share the experiences with the snakes, or is that like an either or? It seems like they interact together.
I always kind of assumed they weren't friendly, but amongst each other. But I have no reason to. I don't know where I'm getting that from.
I always thought they were, but they had two different domains. Sort of. I mean, just like you have fairies, you have like summer fairies and winter fairies.
Sure.
You know, it's two sides of a similar coin, and certainly two cultures. But someone made a good point that they share moraine.
Oh yeah.
So I think that there may be some back and forth between them.
Ugh, gross.
And so we know that, you know, the snakes have the ability to see the pattern. Do the foxes have the ability to grant wishes? Where does that ability come from? Are they able to create items of power? Do they just have items of power sitting around?
Maybe it's something more like the ability to read the pattern and the ability to weave the pattern. If you can just make anything happen, it would have to be like a kind of like channeling, but a little more encompassing than that.
I wonder what the price has to do with that. If perhaps there's a price to be paid for changing the pattern for your wishes, and that there's some sort of karmic balance that has to happen, that when you get something, you also have to lose something. And so when Matt gets all the lives of the dead men, he has to die.
Yeah, it's like a transaction. Although I don't know why it helps them to kill Matt, or attempt to anyway. They have to send him away, but he doesn't have to be alive. He
Yes.
doesn't specify. It's just like, I want to get out of here. And they're like, oh, is that all?
You can take the popular way out, the body box. Feet first.
I feel like this is a good time to say out loud again that when Brigida tells us about the snakes and foxes, like way later in the series, she says something along the lines of, you know, they're not like sadistic or evil, but they're not humans. They're not like us, and they don't follow the same rules that we do. So they might appear to be evil, but what they actually are is something so very different from you and I that we can't understand. I think she also adds, so don't trust them, or something like that.
I like this theory that Bambi came up with. The idea that column Ter'angreal are the result of a wish. The glass column
columns.
Ter'angreal.
I think they're just clear glass that glitter and reflect light.
I always thought they were red crystal, but I might just be confusing that with the red stone Ter'angreal.
Then there are also the red stone columns in the heart of the stone.
Yes. I thought they were all red, and I would bet that it's just my mind confusing them. Yeah, they are clear.
That's what Wiki says anyway, which we all know is slightly suspect. But
Right. But no. I believe that the fact that I've always pictured them as red in my head is totally a misreading. That's just something that I thought once, and then never. You know, you picture things in your head the way you think of them, and you don't necessarily get into the detail and read the description.
yeah, there are a lot of columns and doorways to talk about.
that's true. Yeah. And crystals. I was searching the word crystal, and I was like, Jesus, he uses the word crystal a lot.
Let's see here. I liked Matt threatens the guy, the fox. Says, never think you have caught a babe in your snare. If you try to cheat me, I will have your hide for saddlecloth. The fellow started, pale eyes widening, then shrugged and adjusted the silver-studded straps across his chest. His mocking smile seemed tailored to draw attention to what he was doing. Suddenly, Matt found himself wondering what that pale leather came from.
Humans. It's human skin. It's human hide. That's what he does. He strips people down who don't make proper wishes and don't ask to leave. Someone made wishes and got stuck behind and got skinned for leather.
I'm digging that Morgane's just said, nah, he's just messing with suspenders. It's just a minor clothing adjustment.
And I like how Matt insults him by saying, hey, your hide's not even worth silver stud.
Yeah.
You might silver stud mine, but I'd just throw your hide out. Go on, lead on. Let's go.
There was no way of telling how long they walked. The corridor never changed, with its bent walls and its glowing yellow strips. Every doorway showed the identical chamber, Ter'angreal, footprints and all. The sameness made time slip into formlessness. Matt worried about how long he had been there. Surely, longer than the hour he had given himself. His clothes were only damp now. His boots no longer made squishing noises, but he walked, staring at his guide's back, and walked.
So he spends a week in Rhuidean. And there's really only two times when two points when that much time could pass. Either A, now, when he's wandering down these hallways and he's not sure how much time is passing. I think he does it for days.
Yeah.
And then the only other time, time dilation is, of course, time moves differently in the two worlds. That's certainly possible. The other possibility, which I don't know how, I don't think this is possible, but the fact that he was actually hung and he was hanging for the tree for like a week, and then Matt brought him back, and then Rand brought him back to life.
Yeah,
I find that less likely.
I was going to, or Gaines got to this before me, but I was going to say, like, we don't know how these things affect time. Like, Rand could be in those glass columns for 7 days, and you know what? I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, it must have something to do with that. Because if they didn't drink water or eat food for 7 days, surely we'd hear a little something about that.
Sure.
But so I have to assume that, or I'm assuming, I guess I should say, that they spend at least most of that time in other worlds, in some other plane, in two different ones, but luckily they managed to come out at somewhere around the same time. Otherwise, well, Matt certainly would be dead.
The only reason that I think Matt might be hanging there for all 7 days is the
Odin
story of Odin, because Odin hung for 9 days.
I like it.
And so the idea that Matt was actually hanging there that whole time really sort of fits with the legend of Odin a little bit more than just like, oh, he was hanging there for a few minutes and then Rand happened to pop out at that exact time and cut him down.
And then Rand returns with the dawn on the 7th day or something like that, right? Or yeah, somewhere around that time. Oh, I like that, Kelsey. It appears from the outside that he hung from 7 days, but it may have only been minutes in Rhuidean or less. And it's not a very long noose, so it takes a long time to die like that.
Yeah, you're strangling to death. And he was clearly unconscious. He was hanging and choking. He didn't have his neck broken. Yeah. So, or else there's no coming back for that. So, you can talk about 10 minutes of hang time.
Sorry, it's just funny. Just hanging out.
Just hanging out. Just got some hang time.
I was actually just working my way through all the Dan Carlin hardcore histories recently, and I just listened to, it was one of his free ones, I think it's called Painfotainment, where he just talks about like torture and all the like Roman games and stuff like that. And he actually spends quite a while talking about the different types of hanging and the reports on how long people survived. Apparently earlier, like hanging has been a thing since history started being recorded.
Sure. But
apparently way back when it first started being recorded, the rope was only like a foot from where you were hung. So it was death by strangulation, not death by neck breaking, right, which is how that changed over time. I just listened to like 20 minutes of explanation of hanging.
Yeah. I feel like there's 3 ways to die from hanging. Either the rope's long enough and you're heavy enough that your neck breaks and you're paralyzed and your heart doesn't beat anymore. Or you suffocate slowly because it's cutting off your air supply and not much else.
Not enough pressure to break your neck.
Yeah. I feel like there's a faster way, too, that perhaps if it cuts off the blood flow to your brain, it may only take like 30 seconds to cause you
at least pass
out and die shortly thereafter. So I feel like there is, just depending on how much you weigh and where the pressure is and stuff like that. Oh, and then, yes, there is also the really disgusting, what they used to do is a longer rope and they'd weigh down the feet of the people. So by the time they hit the bottom of the rope, they were moving with enough force to just take the head off.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Just decapitate someone with the noose.
Oh, but the reason that popped into my head is because there are accounts of people sentenced to death who hung for like 15 or 20 minutes before they stopped struggling, because it was like a 6 to 12 inch length of rope that they were hanging from.
And they probably are able to get a little bit of air.
Yeah.
And like that's almost worse, because if you're able to get a little bit of air, you can keep going for another few
Don't
minutes.
Listen to that episode of Hardcore History before you go to sleep, guys. Matt's following his guide down the hallway, and every time he looks down across the corridor, he sees the same exact room. Suddenly...
Physics? What physics?
Suddenly, The corridor ended ahead in another doorway. Matt blinked. He could have sworn that a moment before the hall had stretched on as far as he could see, but he had been watching the sharp-toothed fellow more than what laid ahead. He looked back and nearly swore. The corridor ran back until the glowing yellow strips seemed to come together in a point, and there was not an opening to be seen anywhere along it. When he turned, he was alone, in front of the big five-sided doorway. Burn me, I wish they wouldn't do that. Taking a deep breath, he walked through. It was another white-floored, star-shaped chamber, not so large as the one, or ones, with columns. An 8-pointed star with a glassy black pedestal standing in each point, like a 2-span slice out of one of those columns. Glowing yellow strips ran up the sharp edges of the room and the pedestals. The unpleasant smell was stronger here. He recognized it now. The smell of a wild animal's lair. He hardly noticed it, though, because the chamber was empty except for him. Turning slowly, he frowned at the pedestals. Surely someone should be up on them. Whoever was supposed to answer his questions. He was being cheated. If he could come here, he should be able to get answers. Suddenly, he spun in a circle, searching not the pedestals, but the smooth gray walls. The doorway was gone. There was no way out. Yet, before he completed a second turn, there was someone standing on each pedestal. People like his guide, but dressed differently. 4 were men, the others women, their stiff hair rising in a crest before spilling down their backs. All wore long white skirts that hid their feet. The women had on white blouses that fell below their hips, with high lace necks and pale ruffles at their wrists. The men were even more straps than the guide, wider and studded with gold. Each harness supported a pair of bare-bladed knives on the wearer's chest. Bronze blades, Matt judged from the color, but he would have given all the gold in his possession for just one of them. "Speak," one of the women said in a growling voice. "By the ancient treaty, here is agreement made. What is your need? Speak."
When he turns around, I feel like it's a very cinematic thing that I can just see, like, you spinning with him.
Each
with
time he
camera,
turns,
and he goes
something
around,
changes again.
There's something different, yeah. And that's physics works, right? Like, weirdly in this world, that spinning may actually change where you are. You know, you don't have like left, right, up, down. It doesn't really work that way because it, you know, sometimes going backwards puts you in a totally new room, as we see in the last battle. Like, there is no direct line anywhere. And so spinning around, maybe or maybe they just, you know, popped into place when his back was turned. But
Matt hesitated. That was not what the snaky people had said. They were all staring at him like foxes staring at dinner. Who is the daughter of the 9 moons, and why do I have to marry her? He hoped they would count that as one question. No one answered.
They don't care about your questions.
None of them spoke. They just continued to stare at him with those big pale eyes. "You are supposed to answer," he said. Silence. "Burn your bones to ash. Answer me. Who is the daughter of the 9 moons, and why do I have to marry her? How will I die and live again? What does it mean that I have to give up half the light of the world? These are my 3 questions. Say something." Dead silence.
Do we want to answer them? Who is the daughter of the 9 moons, and why do I have to marry her? She's the Shan Empress, and
she's a babe.
You know, she's a babe. You'll want to. How will I die and live again? The first time or the second time? The first time you get hung and Matt saves you, and Rand saves you. The second time you get hit by lightning and Rand saves you.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean that I have to give up half the light of
Simple.
the world? Yeah. You lose an eye.
NBD.
No big deal. Just one. You need the eye patch. If we're really going to complete the Odin transformation, we got to hang you from the tree and take out an eye.
It's a good look. Those are my 3 questions. Say something. Dead silence. He could hear himself breathing.
You have to wish something.
Hear the blood throbbing in his ears. I have no intention of marrying, and I have no intention of dying either. Whether I am supposed to live whether I'm supposed to live again or not. And now he's just ranting and angry. I walk around with holes in my memory, holes in my life, and you stare at me like idiots. If I had my way, I would want those holes filled.
Ding.
But at least answers to my questions might fill some in my future. You have to answer. Done. One more growled, and Matt blinked. Done? What was done? What did he mean? Burn your eyes, he muttered. Burn your souls, you're as bad as Aes Sedai. Well, I want a way to be free of Aes Sedai and the power.
Ding.
And I want to be away from you and back to Rhuidean.
Ding.
If you will not answer me, open up a door and let me... Done, another man said, and one of the women echoed. Done.
3 wishes. I would want those holes filled. I want a way to be free of Aes Sedai and the power, and I want to be away from you and back to Rhuidean. The first one gives him his memories. The second one gives him the Foxhead Medallion, and the third one gives him the Ashendar Eye, which happens to be a key.
It's a way in and out.
To the doorway of the world of the Eelfin and Aelfin.
I want to be away from you and back to Rhuidean. The second part. Or the last part, I mean. Matt scanned the walls, then glared, turning to take them all in, standing up there on the pedestal staring down at him. Done? What is done? I see no door. You lying goat-fathered fool, a woman said in a whispered growl, and the others repeated it. Fool, fool, fool. Wise to ask leave-taking when you set no price, no terms, yet fool not to first agree on price. We will set the price. They spoke so quickly he could not tell which said what. What was asked will be given. The price will be paid. Burn you, he shouted. What are you talking? Utter darkness closed around him. There was something around his throat. He could not breathe. Air. He could not...
And Matt gets hung. The price, of course, being hung, I would assume.
The price is death.
The price is death, yeah. Here's a question. How did he get hung on the tree? Did the snakes and foxes come out of the doorway? Did they somehow influence him? I mean, clearly they're able to grant wishes and influence the real world. But how did they hang him from the tree?
I assume they can just do things like that. That is the weakest answer ever, now that it's out of my mouth. Margot says, magic? Yes. I mean, if that were true, it would go along with the theory pretty well that the snakes have knowledge, right? Going along with our kind of Western, whatever, stories, traditions. Snakes have the knowledge and they can read the pattern. They have knowledge of things that we don't. But the foxes have the ability to manipulate the pattern, if not know anything about it. So I suppose they could just make a rope and put him in it. That's the best thing I'm coming up with.
That's certainly one explanation, is that they're just able to manipulate the pattern into having him just appear hung.
I can't imagine they would leave their world.
No. I didn't think they would either, but at the same time, like, what if they grant wishes simply by having access to objects of the power, and hanging him they actually did have to leave? That they're a little more...
Yeah. And that's kind of
corporeal.
Like the Ashendar Eye question. Did they have it? Did they make it? Is it from a different time and place? Was it in the world and then they put it where it needed to be? Or what?
And then how did they put the old tongue, the price is the poem that they put in the side of it? Like, did they carve that in?
Or was it already
did
there?
Did it exist with that in it?
Did they just have this relevant artifact and they were like, oh, that suits. Here you go.
That seems very odd. Very, very odd.
I feel...
And it seems like that at least would have to be created by them as a key, because that's the key to their realm. It's not like it's just some random...
Yeah, I mean, we also know, or at least Moraine tells us, that their world is, in comparison to ours, it's like folded. And that's how she explains how the snakes can see the pattern of our world. It's folded against theirs in such a way that they can look at all the different layers. So... I mean, I suppose it could stand to reason that the fox's world is the same, or I suppose it's the same world, where time and place doesn't matter, especially in relevance to our world. So maybe it could be something that was, made by people 1,000,000 trillion years ago, but they can just take it and move it, like cutting a thread out of a quilt and stitching it in somewhere else.
Yeah, like pulling a stitch and then putting it back in.
Yeah.
In a slightly different way.
Talir has a good question, I think. Matt can speak the old tongue, so it doesn't matter with him, but if Moraine or Rand went through this one, would they be able to communicate with the foxes at all? Well, Moraine said that, or what was it, Rand actually said, that he was given a translator.
And so my only question is, would there still be a fox around, or would they just bring in the snake translator? Because they do seem to be some sort of...
Yeah, right? Outside contractor for this job.
Yeah, totally. And there's the idea that maybe the snakes and the foxes are interacting, so maybe the foxes would have had access to the memories of people who spoke common.
Yeah. I mean, if the foxes have the ability to grant wishes, can they just wish for a translator? I'm just being a jerk now.
Yeah, I wish to speak common. Well, gosh.
Yes, wish for a babblefish. I wish I could have a babblefish.
I'll settle for a universal translator, Star Trek style.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?